Customs agents confiscated reels at airports. Directors faced criminal charges in multiple countries. One filmmaker went into hiding after death threats. These 12 films crossed lines that most countries agreed should never be crossed. Number 12. Nekromantik.
Los, Beeilung! Mal ein bisschen plötzlich hier.
Jörg Buttgereit made Nekromantik in 1987 on a budget of about $8,000, and it became one of the most banned films in history. The plot follows a street cleaner who collects body parts from accident scenes and brings them home to his girlfriend. They both have a sexual attraction to corpses, and the film shows that attraction in graphic detail that most audiences found absolutely revolting. The film was shot in West Berlin over 2 years using friends as cast and crew. Buttgereit worked for a film archive during the day and shot Nekromantik on weekends and evenings. The low budget meant practical effects were crude but effective. The corpse used in the film's most notorious scenes was constructed from animal organs bought from butcher shops and molded onto a mannequin frame. What got Nekromantik banned in over 20 countries wasn't just the necrophilia, it was a graphic depiction of it. The film shows actual animal organs being used in sexual acts. There's a scene involving a preserved corpse and a metal pipe that resulted in the film being confiscated by police in multiple jurisdictions. German authorities initially banned it completely, classifying it as harmful to youth. Buttgereit defended the film as a love story about people society rejects. He said he wanted to explore taboo subjects that mainstream cinema wouldn't touch. Critics mostly dismissed it as shock value with no artistic merit. Roger Ebert never reviewed it because he refused to watch it based on descriptions alone. The film developed a cult following among extreme horror fans. Its low-budget aesthetic and transgressive content made it legendary in underground film circles. Bootleg VHS copies traded hands for years before legitimate releases became available in countries where it remained legal. Nekromantik spawned a sequel in 1991 that was even more explicit and resulted in Buttgereit being charged with distributing violent pornography in Germany. He was eventually acquitted, but the legal battles effectively ended his filmmaking career for years. The original film remains banned in countries including Australia, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, and Norway. The film's influence on extreme horror is undeniable. It proved that filmmakers could push boundaries further than anyone thought possible, though whether they should is still debated. Buttgereit never apologized for making it, standing by his work as a legitimate exploration of taboo subject matter. Number 11. The Human Centipede 2, full sequence.
This isn't right, Martin. What you're doing, it's wrong.
Tom Six followed up his controversial 1979 film, The Human Centipede, with a sequel in 2011 that made the original look tame. The plot follows a mentally disturbed man obsessed with the first film who decides to create his own human centipede using 12 people instead of 3. What made this sequel infinitely worse was Six's decision to show everything the first film only implied. The original Human Centipede suggested the surgical procedure and left most of the horror to imagination. The sequel shows it in graphic detail using practical effects that are nauseating to watch. The film is shot in black and white, which somehow makes the violence feel even more grimy and disgusting rather than softening it. Lawrence R. Harvey plays the lead character Martin, and his performance is deliberately repulsive. Martin is intellectually disabled, morbidly obese, and sexually deviant. He doesn't speak a single word in the entire film, just grunts and breathes heavily while committing atrocities. Harvey lost weight and wore prosthetics to achieve the look Six wanted. The British Board of Film Classification initially refused to classify the film, effectively banning it from legal release in the UK. They said the film posed a real risk of harm to viewers and had no artistic merit whatsoever. Six fought the decision, and eventually the BBFC agreed to classify an edited version with 2 minutes and 37 seconds of cuts. Those cuts removed scenes of sexual violence, forced defecation, and graphic mutilation. The film was also banned in Australia initially, though that ban was later overturned with an R rating. New Zealand banned it completely. Several other countries refused classification, which prevented theatrical or home video release. The film made about $600,000 during its limited theatrical release, barely covering its budget. Tom Six claimed he made the sequel specifically to anger censors and critics who dismissed the first film. He wanted to prove he could go further, and he succeeded. Whether that's an achievement worth celebrating is questionable. The film has almost no defenders even among horror fans. Most find it gratuitously vile with nothing to say beyond shock value. Number 10. August Underground's Mortem.
Open your eyes!
Fred Vogel directed August Underground's Mortem in 1923, the second film in his found-footage horror trilogy. The entire series is shot to look like authentic snuff films, but Mortem is by far the most extreme entry. The plot, such as it is, follows two serial callers and a woman as they torture, mutilate, and murder victims while filming everything. The aesthetic is deliberately amateurish. Shaky handheld camera, poor lighting, terrible sound quality. Vogel wanted it to look like something genuinely disturbing you'd find on the dark web. That authenticity is what got it banned. Customs officials and police in multiple countries initially believed they were confiscating actual snuff films. The effects work by Vogel and his team at Toe Tag Pictures was that convincing. The film shows graphic scenes of dismemberment, necrophilia, infanticide, and sexual violence that are almost unwatchable even for horror fans. There's no plot, no character development, no narrative structure. It's just people torturing victims for 77 minutes. Vogel argued this was social commentary about society's obsession with violent media, but most viewers just saw torture porn with no redeeming qualities. August Underground's Mortem was banned in Australia, New Zealand, and most European countries. Germany classified it as harmful media, making possession illegal. In Canada, customs agents have confiscated copies at the border. Even in America, several states have obscenity laws that could potentially be used to prosecute distributors, though to date that hasn't happened. The film cost around $300 to make using practical effects created in Vogel's basement. That minimal budget meant Vogel could distribute it directly, without needing studio backing or mainstream acceptance. He sold copies through his website and at horror conventions to a small audience of extreme horror enthusiasts. Fred Vogel has defended the August Underground series as explorations of evil without Hollywood glamorization. Real serial killers don't have dramatic backstories or understandable motivations. They're just damaged people doing horrible things, and his films reflect that uncomfortable reality. Critics argue there's a difference between unflinching realism and gratuitous exploitation, and Vogel crossed that line repeatedly. Number 9. Grotesque Koji. And it immediately became one of the most banned films in Japanese cinema history. The plot is minimal. A couple is kidnapped by a psychopath who tortures them in his basement, trying to see how much pain they can endure before he culls them. That's it. No backstory, no explanation, just 73 minutes of escalating torture. The film takes clear inspiration from Western torture porn like Saw and Hostel, but strips away any pretense of narrative complexity or moral framework. The kidnapper, played by Shun Nakayama, is simply a sadist with medical training who enjoys inflicting pain. The victims, played by Hiroaki Kawatsure and Sugumi Nagasawa, suffer through progressively worse mutilations while begging for death. What got Grotesque banned in so many countries was its complete lack of context or purpose beyond shocking viewers. The British Board of Film Classification rejected it entirely, saying it posed a genuine risk of harm and had no journalistic, educational, or other value that might justify the depictions of sexual and sadistic violence. That rejection meant legal possession or distribution in the UK became illegal. Japan, where the film was made, allowed its release but with heavy controversy. Critics called it the worst film in Japanese cinema history. Audiences stayed away. The film's limited theatrical run lost money, and distributors in other countries wanted nothing to do with it. Those that did release it faced immediate backlash and bans. Shiraishi claimed he made Grotesque as a criticism of torture porn as a genre. He wanted to show how empty and meaningless extreme violence is when stripped of narrative justification. If that was the intent, the message was lost. The film just comes across as nihilistic sadism, with nothing to say. The special effects were created by Yoshihiro Nishimura, known for his work on Tokyo Gore Police and Machine Girl. His prosthetics and gore effects are convincingly realistic, which only made the bans more severe. When violence looks that real, authorities tend to assume it serves no purpose except exploitation. Grotesque remains banned in the UK, Germany, Australia, and numerous other countries. Even in places where it's technically legal, distributors won't touch it. The film exists in a legal gray area where possession might be technically allowed, but distribution could violate obscenity laws depending on jurisdiction. Number 8. Philosophy of a Knife. Andrei Iskanov directed Philosophy of a Knife in 2008, a 4-hour Russian film about Unit 731, the Japanese biological warfare unit that conducted horrific experiments on prisoners during World War II. The film attempts to depict those experiments with graphic realism, and the result is one of the most unwatchable films ever made. Unit 731 was real. Between 1937 and 1945, Japanese scientists conducted experiments on thousands of Chinese prisoners, Soviet prisoners, and others. They tested biological weapons, performed vivisections without anesthesia, froze limbs to study frostbite, and committed atrocities that rival anything the Nazis did. The Japanese government destroyed most records and granted immunity to the scientists in exchange for their research data. Iskanov decided to dramatize these events with extreme graphic detail. The film shows vivisections, amputations, plague infections, and other experiments using a combination of practical effects and real animal organs. The runtime stretches to 4 hours and 22 minutes in the uncut version, making it an endurance test, even beyond the disturbing content. The film was banned in multiple countries for several reasons. First, the graphic violence exceeded what most classification boards would allow. Second, the sexual violence against prisoners was deemed exploitative rather than educational. Third, there were concerns that showing these experiments in such detail could provide a blueprint for real atrocities. Iskanov shot the film in Russia over several years with a minimal budget. The cast consisted mostly of non-professional actors willing to participate in extremely uncomfortable scenes. The production was chaotic, with crew members quitting after seeing what they were being asked to film. Critical reception was overwhelmingly negative. Even extreme horror fans found Philosophy of a Knife unwatchable and pointless. The historical subject matter deserves serious treatment, but Iskanov's approach felt exploitative rather than educational. Documentaries about Unit 731 exist that convey the horror without wallowing in graphic recreation. Number 7. Guinea Pig. Flower of Flesh and Blood. Hideshi. Hino directed Flower of Flesh and Blood in 1985 as the second entry in Japan's Guinea Pig series. The film is 42 minutes of a woman being drugged, dismembered, and disemboweled by a man dressed as a samurai. There's no plot, no dialogue after the opening, just methodical mutilation shown in extreme close-up using some of the most convincing practical effects ever created. The film became infamous in 1991 when actor Charlie Sheen, believing he'd witnessed an actual snuff film, reported it to the FBI. The FBI investigated, tracked down the filmmakers in Japan, and confirmed it was special effects. But that incident gave the Guinea Pig series worldwide notoriety and led to bans in dozens of countries. The series started in 1985 as an experiment in extreme horror. The first film, The Devil's Experiment, showed a woman being tortured for 43 minutes. Flower of Flesh and Blood took it further with dismemberment effects, so realistic that even forensic experts initially couldn't confirm they were fake without contacting the production team. Hideshi Hino, a manga artist before becoming a filmmaker, designed the effects himself. He used real animal organs, careful prosthetics, and editing tricks to create seamless illusions of mutilation. The result looked disturbingly real, which was both the point and the problem. When your special effects are too convincing, they stop being entertainment and start resembling evidence. The film was banned in Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Finland, and numerous other countries. Japan allowed it to remain available, but with warnings about graphic content. In some jurisdictions, merely possessing a copy became illegal under laws designed to prevent distribution of actual snuff films. The Guinea Pig series continued with 6 entries total, though later films moved toward horror comedy after the snuff film accusations created too much controversy. Flower of Flesh and Blood remains the most notorious entry and the most widely banned. Its influence on extreme horror is significant, proving that convincing effects could create visceral reactions that standard horror couldn't match. Number 6. Cannibal Holocaust. Ruggero Deodato directed Cannibal Holocaust in 1980, and it remains one of the most controversial films ever made. The story follows a rescue team searching for a documentary crew that disappeared in the Amazon rainforest. They find the crew's footage, and the film shows what happened through that recovered material. What they filmed was so disturbing that the fictional documentary becomes the real horror. The film was immediately banned in Italy, and Deodato was arrested and charged with obscenity. Authorities were convinced he'd made an actual snuff film. The actors had signed contracts agreeing not to appear in any media for a year after release to maintain the illusion that they'd really died. That marketing stunt backfired when prosecutors used their absence as evidence of murder. Deodato eventually had to produce the actors in court to prove they were alive. But that didn't end the legal troubles. The film contains real animal killings, including a turtle, a monkey, a pig, and a snake. Those deaths were genuine, filmed for the movie, and they remain in the final cut. That alone got the film banned in dozens of countries under animal cruelty laws. The human violence is equally extreme: impalement, dismemberment, sexual assault, infanticide, all shown in graphic detail using practical effects that were shockingly realistic for 1980. The film's thesis is that the civilized documentary crew becomes more savage than the indigenous people they were filming, but that message gets buried under relentless brutality. Cannibal Holocaust was banned in Australia, Norway, Finland, Iceland, Ireland, Germany, Singapore, and many others. Some countries have since lifted bans with heavy cuts. The UK didn't allow an uncut release until 2011, over 30 years after the film was made. Even then, it was only classified after the real animal, killings, were confirmed to be the only actual deaths in the film. The film cost around $100,000 and made over $200 million through worldwide distribution, though much of that came from illegal bootleg copies. It's been called the most profitable banned film ever made. Deodato has expressed regret about the animal killings, but defends the rest of the film as social commentary. The found footage format influenced the Blair Witch Project and countless horror films that followed. But the extreme content means Cannibal Holocaust remains too controversial for mainstream rehabilitation. It exists in this weird space where film scholars acknowledge its technical innovation while condemning its methods and content. Number 5. Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom. Pier. Paolo Pasolini directed Salò in 1975, adapting Marquis de Sade's novel and transplanting it to Mussolini's Italian Social Republic in 1944. The film shows fascist libertines kidnapping 18 young people and subjecting them to 4 months of psychological, physical, and sexual torture. It was Pasolini's final film. He was murdered 3 weeks before it premiered, and the circumstances remain mysterious. The film is structured in 4 sections based on Dante's Inferno, with each circle representing escalating depravity. The Ante Inferno introduces the victims and captors. The Circle of Manias shows psychological torture. The Circle of Excrement shows forced coprophagia. The Circle of Blood shows mutilation and murder. Each section is more unwatchable than the last. What makes Salò different from pure exploitation is Pasolini's clear political intent. He's using extreme imagery to explore how fascism dehumanizes and destroys. The libertines represent power structures that view people as objects to be used and discarded. The victims represent everyone crushed by authoritarian systems. Whether that political framework justifies the graphic content is still debated 50 years later. The film was immediately banned in Pasolini's native Italy. Authorities confiscated prints and charged distributors with obscenity. The ban lasted decades, with the film only becoming legal in Italy in the late 90s. Other countries followed suit. Australia banned it until 1998. New Zealand banned it until 1993. Several countries still refuse classification. The coprophagia scenes are particularly difficult to watch. While the excrement shown was actually chocolate, knowing that doesn't make the scenes less disturbing. Pasolini filmed these sequences with clinical detachment, no music, minimal editing, forcing viewers to sit with the discomfort. That aesthetic choice makes the film feel more like a documentary than exploitation. Salò cost around $650,000 and has made millions through legitimate and bootleg distribution. Critics are divided. Some call it Pasolini's masterpiece, a devastating critique of fascism. Others call it unwatchable garbage hiding behind pretentious political messaging. There's no middle ground. The film's reputation was cemented by Pasolini's murder. He was beaten to death by a 17-year-old prostitute, or so the official story goes. Many believe Pasolini was cold because of his controversial films and leftist politics. The murder remains unsolved, adding tragic mystique to Salò as his final statement. Number 4. A Serbian Film.
Sam Bog te poslao, sine. Gospod te doveo da nas spasi. Sam Bog te poslao, sine.
Srđan Spasojević directed a Serbian film in 2010, and it immediately became one of the most banned films of the modern era. The plot follows a retired adult film star who's offered a fortune to participate in one final production. He agrees without knowing what he's signing up for, and what follows is a descent into depravity involving snuff, necrophilia, pedophilia, and newborn infant rape. Yes, you read that correctly. There's a scene involving a newborn infant that resulted in the film being banned in dozens of countries instantly. The scene is simulated using prosthetics and editing, but the implication alone was enough for most classification boards to reject the film entirely. Spain, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Norway, and many others banned it completely. Spasojević claims the film is a political allegory about Serbia's relationship with its government. The protagonist represents the Serbian people forced to participate in their own degradation by corrupt power structures. The extreme content is meant to reflect how violated and exploited Serbians feel. Most critics and viewers dismiss this explanation as a pretentious justification for shock value. The film cost around €400,000 and was shot in Belgrade over several weeks. The cast included Serbian actors willing to participate in extremely uncomfortable scenes. Some of the crew quit during production after realizing how extreme the material was. The final product is technically well made, which somehow makes it worse. The BBFC in Britain initially rejected the film, then later approved it with 4 minutes and 11 seconds of cuts, removing the most extreme sexual violence. The uncut version remains illegal in the UK. Australia's ban was appealed multiple times before authorities finally classified an edited version with a 9-minute cut. The full uncut version remains banned there. A Serbian film played at several film festivals where it was met with walkouts and outrage. The South by Southwest Film Festival rejected it. Fright Fest in London showed it once and immediately faced backlash. Most festivals wanted nothing to do with it. The few that screened it did so only to immediately condemn it. Serjan Spasojevic has defended his film in numerous interviews, insisting the extreme content serves the political message. He claims censoring the film proves his point about authoritarian control. Most viewers and critics remain unconvinced. The film exists primarily as notoriety, something people have heard about, but almost nobody has actually watched.